This video is a commentary on the issue of errors that have come to exist within the prevalent versions of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib. The objective is to provide you with three things. First, the facts. Second, a background to the issue. And third, a commentary on how to resolve it. The issue of errors within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib has come into the open on two accounts. The first is the act of publishing an online corrected version of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji by Sardar Karminder Singh Dhillon of the Sikh Book Club. And the second is the Akal Takht's response of declaring Karminder Singh guilty of an offence that can lead to excommunication from the Sikh Panth. He is not the first to face the sword of excommunication on this issue. Dr. Pyar Singh was kicked out of the Panth in 1993 in relation to the same issue. Dr. Pyar Singh, a professor of Punjabi language, literature and culture at the Guru Nanak Dev University, had written on the issue in his book Gatha Sri Ad Granth, the story of Ad Granth. The English version was published by Michigan University, USA, and the one in Punjabi by Guru Nanak Dev University, Punjab. His book was banned by the Akal Takht. Similarly, Gurbani researcher G.B. Singh had in 1944 written on the same issue in his book titled Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Diyan Pracheen Beedan about the old beads of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. He was saved from excommunication by his death in 1959. The difference now is simply that Karminder Singh is being silenced in full glare of the internet and social media, and also that the issue is being swept under the carpet in full view of the Sikh world. My own assessment is that Karminder Singh and the Akal Takht have opened a Pandora's box which will be difficult to shut. It is also my assessment that the issue of errors within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji is set to become the central, most significant and core issue for Sikhs, particularly the Gurbani-loving ones. It is an issue which is as demanding, complicated and complex as it is divisive, emotive and sensitive for the Sikh Panth. The Sikh world has to be prepared for it. This video is aimed at bringing about that understanding. So let's start with the facts. And the plain fact, as painful as it will sound, is that the prevalent printed versions of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji contain numerous errors. There are some who allege that it is blasphemous to suggest that the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji contains errors, and that all those who say so openly and publicly should be punished. Bhai Jodh Singh, for instance, in his 1947 book Pracheen Beedan Bare Bhullan Diyan Sodhan, while replying to G.B. Singh, has argued that Sikhi would suffer a fatal blow if the notion that the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji contains errors and discrepancies is entertained. The Sri Guru Granth Sahib is Turki Bani, and Turki Bani cannot and does not have errors and or discrepancies. This ostrich mentality must be discarded, because burying our heads in the sand on the issue has not only contributed to the problem, but prevents its rational discourse and logical resolution. So back to the facts. Bhai Khan Singh Nabha, the author of the Sikh Encyclopedia, was perhaps the first to draw our attention to the issue of errors in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji in his 1918 book, Gurgira Kasauti. One of the Sikh Panth's foremost authority on the issue of errors within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib, Gyani Jagtar Singh Jachak, reiterates this fact as follows.
मैं आज ऐलान में कहना कि हजारां ही उतारे होंगे श्री गुरु ग्रंथ साहिब जी दे लिखारियां कीते कोई एक बीड़ भी दूजी बीड़ ना मिलदी दिखा दियो.
The first thing we need to understand is that the root of the problem lies in the hand copying, printing, typesetting, proofreading, and the benchmarking processes. These processes are critical if we want a publication that isn't riddled with errors. But when it came to the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, these processes were either neglected, done unprofessionally, overlooked, or totally ignored. So we are where we are today, printed versions of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji with numerous errors. So Turki Bani cannot have errors, and no Sikh has ever suggested or implied such. But the process of copying and printing Turki Bani can and does have errors aplenty. These two things, errors in Gurbani and errors in the duplication of Gurbani, cannot be confused. If they are being confused, it is being done with one objective, which is to silence those who say there are errors and want corrective action. The end result is that the task of correcting these errors is swept under the carpet and the Sikh Panth as a whole loses out in the process. Now, one of the most basic things when it comes to having a Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji that is free from errors and discrepancies is the benchmark itself. The benchmark or the point of reference is the Poti Sahib, or what is called the Bhai Gurdas Wali Beard. This beard was completed in 1604 under the editorship of Guru Arjan Ji and written in the hand of Bhai Gurdas Ji. The Bhai Gurdas Wali Beard is hence the benchmark. It should be. It should have been. So the question is, where is this beard? Who has it? Is it in the possession of SGPC, the Sikh Reference Library, the Akal Takht, any of the other four takhts? The answer is simply that we don't have it. It does not exist. How and why this beard, the authentic and original benchmark of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, has gone missing or was made to go missing will be made clear a little later. Now, what has been presented to the Sikh world as the benchmark is called the Kartarpuri beard. This beard is in Kartarpur and in the hands of a private family called Sodhis, who are the descendants of the Tirmal family. Tirmal and his son are the two individuals who attempted to murder Guru Tegh Bahadur Pasha, our ninth Guru. The Tirmalis belong to a sect which is declared as anti-Sikh by the Sikh Rath Maryada. In essence, then, the so-called benchmark of Gurbani is with people with whom we Sikhs are not supposed to interact as per command of the Sikh Rath Maryada. So now, the question is this: is the Kartarpuri beard the one that is in possession of the Tirmalis and the Sodhis the same as Bhai Gurdas Wali beard, or is it an adulterated, distorted and corrupted version of it, and in the hands of people who are either anti-Sikh, non-Sikh or downright enemies of Sikhs? So what can we really expect? That they maintained the sanctity of Gurbani for us? That they would want us Sikhs to have an accurate version of Gurbani? I will provide two sets of facts that will indicate that the Kartarpuri beard is not the same as the Bhai Gurdas Wali beard. That will be later. But for now, we need to know that the primary reason why Dr. Pyar Singh got excommunicated and the reason why G.B. Singh would have been excommunicated if not for his death is that both of them proved through extensive research that the Kartarpuri beard is an adulterated, distorted, and corrupted version of the Poti Sahib. They were not supposed to say that aloud and publicly. They did, and they paid a price. In any case, then, in the absence of the original and authentic manuscript, the benchmark has been the Kartarpuri beard, the one in the possession of the Tirmalis first and now in the Sodhis. And if you look at the first page of every prevalent beard of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, you will find a statement to the effect. Here is one example. ਆਦਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਟਾਈਪ ਅਤੇ ਅੱਖਰਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਕਰਤਾਰਪੁਰੀ ਵਾਲੇ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨਾਲ ਸੁਧਾਇਆ ਗਿਆ ਔਰ ਸਾਰੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬਾਂ ਨਾਲੋਂ ਜੋ ਛਪ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਹਨ ਸ਼ੁੱਧ ਹੈ। ਰਾਏ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਮੁਨਸ਼ੀ ਗੁਲਾਬ ਸਿੰਘ ਐਂਡ ਸੰਸ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਮੁਫੀਦ ਆਮ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਲਾਹੌਰ ਵਿਖੇ ਛਪਾਈ। Translation: The type and letters of this version of Ad Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji have been proofread with the Kartarpuri version and is more accurate than all other versions of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji that have been printed. Published by Rai Sahib Munshi Gulab Singh and Sons at their esteemed arm press at Lahore. Here is a second example from a different printer. ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸੁਧਾਈ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਪੰਚਮ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਸਤਿਗੁਰੂ ਅਰਜਨ ਦੇਵ ਜੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਦੀ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਕਰਤਾਰਪੁਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਅਤੇ ਦਮਦਮੇ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਵਾਲੀ ਬੀੜ ਦੇ ਉਤਾਰਿਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਤਨ ਮਨ ਤੇ ਧਨ ਦੁਆਰਾ ਬੜੀ ਸ਼ਰਧਾ ਤੇ ਪ੍ਰੇਮ ਸਹਿਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਗਈ ਹੈ। ਪੂਰਨ ਨਿਸ਼ਚਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਬੀੜ ਲਗ ਕੰਨੇ ਮਾਤਰਾ ਤੱਕ ਸ਼ੁੱਧ ਹੈ। ਪ੍ਰਕਾਸ਼ਕ ਸ਼ੁੱਧ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਟਕਸਾਲ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਸਰ ਜੀ। Translation: This version has been proofread with full faith and diligence with the Kartarpuri beard of Sadguru Arjan Patsha and with copies of the Damdama Sahib beard. We are certain that it is accurate to the letter. Publisher: Shuddh Gurbani Taksal, Amritsar. Now, given that we have countless errors in the prevalent printed versions of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, there are two possibilities here with regard to the above claims by the printers. The first is that these are grandiose claims. They are no more than advertising. It is a printer's way of saying that their version contained no errors, while those of their rival printers contained numerous errors. In other words, the kind of proofreading and benchmarking that is claimed was never really undertaken. How else do we explain the problem of errors that still exist and keep growing? The second possibility is a horrendous one, which is that these printers had indeed done the proofreading and benchmarking with the Kartarpuri beard, but they were not given access to the one and same Kartarpuri beard. The Tirmalis and the Sodhis actually had in their possession a number of versions, a number of beards that they adulterated. When a printer, a proofreader, a researcher, writer, or an academic came to them to examine the Kartarpuri beard, they presented whichever beard they chose to present. What is the evidence of the Tirmalis and Sodhis having multiple adulterated and corrupted hand copies of the Poti Sahib, copies they call the Kartarpuri beard. For one, all you need to do is read the commentary of just about anyone who has been allowed access to the so-called Kartarpuri beard. You need to know that access is extremely rarely granted. Yet, everyone who has been granted access has a different story to talk about regarding what is on page what, where the beard concludes, how many pages, what type of script, who signed it, etc., etc. It soon becomes clear that those allowed access are not looking at the same beard. They are looking at whatever beard is presented to them to examine by the Sodhis. A SGPC team led by Jodh Singh of Khalsa Diwan, for instance, has written that the Sodar Bani within the Kartarpuri beard does not contain the So Purkh Paudi. Now, how can this be? Others claim to have seen the So Purkh Paudi within the Sodar portion of the same Kartarpuri beard. One wonders if they are all looking at the same beard. Now, listen to Gyani Jagtar Singh Jachak, former head Granthi of Darbar Sahib and Gurbani expert, talk about this issue.
ਜਿੰਨੇ ਲਿਖਾਰੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਗਏ ਨਾ ਵਿਦਵਾਨ ਗਏ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਹੀ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਜੀ ਹੁਣ ਤੱਕ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਨਵੀਂ ਭੀੜ ਦਿਖਾ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ
History tells us that when the Poti Sahib or Bhai Gurdas Wali bead was completed and before it was installed, one Bhai Banno was given the task of making handwritten copies of it for the purposes of Gurbani Prachar. Bhai Banno's hand copy versions thus became the standard text for further copies. These copies of copies were also referred to as Bhai Banno Wali beard. Currently, there are 3 beards with the claim that it is the exact one which Bhai Banno himself copied from the Poti Sahib. The first is in Mangat, Gujarat, with Bhai Banno's ancestors. The second is at Gurdwara Baba Ayapal Singh Nabha, and the third at Drankari Gurdwara, Rawalpindi. The claim that any one of these 3 beards is the one that Bhai Banno himself copied from the Poti Sahib fails because all 3 contain major adulterations in the form of non-Gurbani compositions, including the compositions of Mira. In the second one, the word Mehla across the entire Granth is changed to Padshahi. This is clearly an adulteration or distortion. The 2 points that need to be made are as follows. One, that not only is the Bhai Gurdas Wali beard not available, the first authorized copy by Banno Wali beard is also not available. What we have are copies of copies of copies. The second point worth appreciating is that the very process of creating copies of copies entails within itself the possibility and the reality of errors, both accidental or what we call human errors and purposive distortions. The purposive part needs some elaboration. Our Guru told us, Sadgur bina hor kachi hai bani. Bani ta kachi, Sadgur bajo hor kachi bani. Kehende kache, surde kache, kachi aap vakhani. And at the end, kahe Nanak Sadgur bajo hor kachi bani. Meaning, Bani other than that of the creating connecting Guru is not God linking. Any Bani other than that emanating from my Guru is not creator connecting. Those who recite, listen, read and discourse Kachi Bani, Bani that is not creator connecting, remain unconnected and unlinked to God. Nanak, that which is not emanating from the creator connecting Guru is not God-linking Bani. The warning against the adulteration of Gurbani with Kachi Bani was given by our Gurus. In the post-Guru period, especially during the 60 to 70 years after the defeat of Banda Singh, when Sikhs were being hunted down, the hijackers of Sikhi succeeded in eliminating the original Pothi Sahib and the Pai Banno copy and replaced them with adulterated versions of multiple beads, all mixed up with Kachi Bani composed by people like Prithvi Chand, Tirmala, Meera, and others. Those who have examined the Kartarpuri bead critically have opined that it is actually an adulterated copy of the Pai Banno wali bead. In 1831, Maharaja Ranjit Singh is said to have taken possession of a bead from the Tirmal family on the basis that it was a national artifact. This bead was later seized by the British along with other treasures of Maharaja Dalip Singh when the latter was disposed. The British took a number of beads to London. The Tirmalis sued the British government for the return of the bead. The British returned one bead to the Tirmalis and 3 beads to the SGPC. No one quite knows which bead was returned to the Sotis and which to the SGPC. Now, this is what Gyani Jagtar Singh Jachak has said on this particular issue.
1831 ਜਦੋਂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਆਇਆ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬੀੜ ਕਰਤਾਰਪੁਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਵਾਲੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਇਹ ਨਾਲ ਲੈ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਜਦੋਂ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ਾਂ ਰਾਜ ਆਇਆ ਉਹ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਚੁੱਕ ਕੇ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਲੰਡਨ ਫਿਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਰੌਲਾ ਪਾਇਆ ਸਾਡੀ ਜ਼ਗੀਰ ਵਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ 3 ਬੀੜਾਂ ਵਾਪਸ ਮੋੜੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਚ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿਹੜੀ ਬੀੜ ਰੱਖੀ ਤੇ ਕਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਵਾਪਸ ਮੋੜੀਆਂ ਇਹ ਰੌਲਾ ਘਚੋਲਾ ਹੀ ਆ
Now, the second benchmark is the Dum Dummy Beard. This bead was edited by Guru Gobind Singh Ji and scripted by Pai Mani Singh. In essence, the Dum Dummy Beard is a rewrite and rearrangement of the Pothi Sahib. This is because the Bani of Guru Tegh Bahadur, the 9th Guru, had to be added within relevant portions of the pre-existing chapters. This bead was completed in 1706 and Gurgaddi was granted to it in 1708. By right Pyareo, this Dum Dummy Beard ought to be the benchmark, and that's because Gurgaddi, Guruship, was granted to this beard and not to Pothi Sahib or to the Pai Gurdas Wali beard. But the reality is that we do not have the original copy of the Dum Dummy Beard either. It was lost in the Battle of Kuparhide, also known as the Vada Kalukara or the Great Holocaust. This is an event in 1761 where some 100,000 Sikhs were ambushed and massacred in the jungles of Punjab where they had taken refuge. The original copy of the Dum Dummy Beard is believed to have been taken to Kabul as part of the loot by the Afghan invaders. 4 copies of the Dum Dummy Beard are said to have been made by Baba Deep Singh. These copies are now kept at the Akal Takht, Patna Sahib, Anandpur Sahib and Damdama Sahib. The truth of these 4 copies is as startling as it is expected. All 4 of them contain numerous errors, different errors within all 4. There are 2 possibilities at work here. One is that the 4 copies were not made by the same person, which is why I said above that the 4 copies are said to have been made by Baba Deep Singh. The second possibility is that these 4 copies are not of the same one original. They are in fact copies of different copies of copies. The second possibility best explains the fact that the errors within all 4 beads are not the same errors. They are different errors. I want to bring your attention to a relevant narrative within the book titled Panth Prakash, written by Nirmala Gyani Gyan Singh in 1891. On page 62 of the chapter titled Tawarik Raj Khalsa, there is this revelation that in 1760, 52 years after the demise of Guru Gobind Singh, Baba Deep Singh goes to Kartarpur to benchmark the Dum Dummy Beard with the Kartarpuri beard. Gyani Gyan Singh offers no explanation as to why there was a need for Baba Deep Singh to do that. My own assessment is that the real intention of the Nirmala writer Gyani Gyan Singh when it comes to this story is to introduce within the Sikh psyche two thoughts. One, the notion that Baba Deep Singh doubted the authenticity of the Dum Dummy Beard, and two, the notion that Guru Gobind Singh Ji's work was somehow defective and needed benchmarking. If Baba Deep Singh's objective was to proofread and to correct errors from within any of his own copies, he should be comparing his work with the original Dum Dummy Beard and not with any other beard. Actually, the narrative of Nirmala writer Gyani Gyan Singh has no truth in it. Nirmala writers have, after all, played an extensive part in corrupting, distorting, and fabricating Sikh historical narratives in line with their role as the hijackers of Sikhi. These are the same Nirmalas who told us the lie that Guru Gobind Singh did not have the Pothi Sahib in his possession, and that he recited the entire Dum Dummy Beard from memory. Then what was the problem? What was the need for Baba Deep Singh to go benchmark the Dum Dummy Beard with any other? It appears that the primary objective of writing this false narrative is to establish the legitimacy of the Kartarpuri beard. When Sikhs read that Baba Deep Singh benchmarked the Dum Dummy Beard or his own copies of the Dum Dummy Beard with the Kartarpuri beard, the Kartarpuri beard is made into a legitimate and authentic source for the benchmarking by the Nirmala writer. When Sikhs are told by the Nirmala writers that Guru Gobind Singh did not have the Pothi Sahib with him, the suggestion is that the Tirmallis had taken possession of Pothi Sahib immediately or soon after it was put together by Guru Arjan. The suggestion is that these Tirmallis have had Pothi Sahib ever since, and what they have with them now, the Kartarpuri beard, is really the Pothi Sahib. It is an attempt to provide legitimacy to their Kartarpuri beard. It is, of course, based on a lie. Now, the truth of the matter, of course, is that every Guru had the Bani of his predecessor Guru in his possession. So once the Pothi Sahib was composed by Guru Arjan, every subsequent Guru had it in his possession. Its Prakash was central and pivotal to all the Divans that were held by the 5th till the 10th Gurus. So Guru Gobind Singh Ji had the Pothi Sahib with him. The same Gyani Gyan Singh writes on page 1062 of Tawarik Guru Khalsa that once Guru Gobind Singh completed the Dum Dummy Beard, 7 discrepancies were discovered. So the question is, if Guru Gobind Singh did not have the Pothi Sahib with him, how was he able to discover 7 discrepancies or 7 errors? Even if we believe the narrative that the Tirmallis have had the Pothi Sahib from the start, we know that Kartarpur was burnt down in 1718. This means that whichever beads were held there in Kartarpur in this year were destroyed. This further means that the beads that are held at Kartarpur now are no more than copies of copies of copies that were created after the fire. I want to take you to 1951 now because this is an important year for the issue of errors within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Till 1951, the printing and publishing of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib is best described as a free-for-all. Handwritten and printed beads were published and sold by private printers using the type print press. And of course, they contained countless errors. And why would they not? This is how a type print block looks like. As it can be seen, the letters need to be arranged one alphabet at a time. Individual letters were selected, picked up from their storage boxes and arranged in reverse. It can be expected that wrong alphabets were picked up, or that alphabets dropped out, were wrongly placed, or that the typesetters simply ran short of a particular alphabet. But the printing process had to go on, and it went on, complete with all the typesetting errors. We need to talk about 1951 in greater detail. In this year, the SGPC set up a special committee of 5 persons, which was led by Sardar Jodh Singh of the Chief Khalsa Diwan. This committee was tasked with comparing prevalent printed versions of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib with the Kartarpuri bead that was in possession of the Sodhis, and then present a report of its findings to the Religious Advisory Committee of the SGPC. 6 years later, in 1957, this 5-man committee was expanded to 10. It comprised of 5 persons from the SGPC and 5 more collectively from the Sant Samaj, Chief Khalsa Diwan, the Udasis, and Nirmala groups. The composition raises questions. Why are those groups that do not accept the Sri Guru Granth Sahib as Guru being invited? The Udasis don't accept Guru Angad till Guru Gobind Singh. So they don't accept the Sri Guru Granth Sahib as Guru. The Nirmalas were all about Brahmanizing and Sanatanizing Sikhi, working hand in glove with the governments of the day to undermine, to corrupt and to distort Sikhi. The Sant Samaj advocates Dehtari Gurudom, or physical gurus in place of the Shabd Guru, openly or covertly. So why are these people part of an SGPC endeavor? Perhaps the Nirmalas, Udasis and Sant Samaj groups had no real qualms about being in the committee because the standardization was done by using the Tirmalis and Sodhis owned Kartarpuri bead. They were aware that the benchmark itself was questionable. So why not be part of an effort that provided them with legitimacy but brought no real benefits to the Sikh world in terms of authenticating Gurbani? For the Bani of Guru Tegh Bahadur, this 10-man committee agreed to use the Akal Takht version of the Baba Deep Singh copy as the benchmark. Why this copy and not any of the other 3 was not explained. In any case, the objective of the 10-man committee was straightforward. Come up with a standardized version of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib, which will be printed solely and exclusively by the SGPC. The committee met 13 times and worked till 1959. All of its minutes are recorded in writing. The outcome of the 10-person committee's work was the discovery and correction of a total of 733 errors. The placement of the opening verse Ek Oankar Til Gur Prasad in all 31 chapters was standardized in that it was placed above the Rag and Bani titles. all future printing of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib was to be done solely by the SGPC's printers, namely the Ramsar press at Amritsar. 1,000 blocks, plates were made. This means that typeset printing was replaced by plate printing. This 1960 publication titled ਸ਼੍ਰੋਮਣੀ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਛਾਪੀ ਗਈ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੀ ਬੀੜ ਬਾਰੇ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਵਾਕਫੀਅਤ tells the narrative of the SGPC published beads, the what, the how, and the why of it. The first SGPC bead, or what is commonly called the Sangli bead, was published in 1962. At the ground level, the SGPC faced horrendous opposition to its work. The opposition came primarily from the private publishers, the Chief Khalsa Diwan and the Sant Samaj. For the private publishers, the issue was loss of income. They could no longer print and sell the SGGS. For the Chief Khalsa Diwan, it was all about politics. SGPC at that time was controlled by the Congress and the Chief Khalsa Diwan by Akalis. As for the Sant Samaj, they were simply unhappy because they wanted changes to suit their own beliefs and their own agendas. The general allegation was that the SGPC had altered Bani. Actually, this allegation comes up each time someone talks of doing something about the issue of errors within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. It came up against Dr. Pyar Singh and G.B. Singh. We hear it now against Karminder Singh. This bogus allegation works very well with the Sikh masses, 99% of whom have never examined the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji for themselves. 99% are not aware of the significance of a Sihari or an Onkar. Most Sikhs are unaware that we no longer have the Bhai Gurdas Wali bead and the Dum Dummy Beard in their original versions. Most are unaware of the question of authenticity and integrity of the Kartarpuri bead, which is being used as the benchmark. Most are unaware or have been kept unaware that the Kartarpuri bead, which is used as the benchmark, is not written by a single writer but by multiple writers. Listen to Gyani Jagtar Singh Jachak on this matter.
ਕਰਤਾਰਪੁਰੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਵਾਲੀ ਬੀੜ ਵਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਲਖਾਰੀ ਇੱਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਆ ਇੱਕ ਪੰਨੇ ਤੇ ਹੀ ਤਿੰਨ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਲਿਖਤਾਂ ਮਿਲਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ.
We know that the Pothi Sahib was written by a single writer, Bhai Gurdas. So obviously the Kartarpuri beard is not the Pothi Sahib. The Kartarpuri beard is not the Bhai Gurdas Wali beard. Most are unaware that the main writer of the Kartarpuri beard was proficient in Hindi and not Punjabi. Listen to Gyani Jagtar Singh talk about the research of another authority on the Kartarpuri beard, Gyani Joginder Singh Talwada.
ਲਖਾਰੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ ਭਾਈ ਜੋਗਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਤਲਵਾੜਾ ਦੱਸਦੇ ਸਨ ਕਿ ਜਾਪਦਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਹਿੰਦੀ ਦਾ ਵਿਦਵਾਨ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਉਹਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਔਂਕੜ ਪਾਏ ਨੇ, ਦਲੈਂਕੜ ਪਾਏ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਟਿੱਪੀ ਦੀ ਥਾਂ ਕੇਵਲ ਬਿੰਦੀ ਪਾਈ ਹਿੰਦੀ ਦੀ, ਥੱਲੇ ਔਂਕੜ ਪਾਏ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਹਿੰਦੀ ਨੁਮਾ ਨੇ, ਉਹ ਗੁਰਮੁਖੀ ਦਾ ਲਖਾਰੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਅਸਲ ਵਿੱਚ.
So this Pyareo was the narrative of the 1951 to 1962 effort. Let's move on to 1974 now. In this year, the Kendri Singh Sabha Amritsar had a seminar titled Sri Guru Granth Vichar Sammelan or Sri Guru Granth Discourse Seminar, which was officiated by the then president of the SGPC, Gurcharan Singh Toda. Joginder Singh Vedanti, a Granthi of Darbar Sahib, presented a paper containing a list of up to 5,000 errors that he had found within the Sangli beard. There were a number of Gurbani experts, Principal Sadbir Singh, Principal Harbhajan Singh, and Gyani Gurdeep Singh, who were present at this seminar. Tahoda made it absolutely clear that he was not in favor of public discussion of the issue and wanted a closed-door resolution. Then in 1977, a three-man committee of researchers was appointed by SGPC to further study the issue of errors and discrepancies within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. This committee was led by renowned scholar Ranveer Singh, who was assisted by Gyani Kundan Singh and Gyan Singh Nihang, also of SGPC. This committee analyzed up to 70 beads of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji that were present in the reference library and compared them with the prevalent Sangri bead. The committee produced a comprehensive report of errors and discrepancies. This is the report. This is a photo of the first and the last page. I am putting it up to point out the painstaking nature of the work. Imagine the meticulousness, doing a prakash of 70 beads, checking every word in the entire text, and then comparing it across 60-70 beads, and then finding out that there were discrepancies within virtually every verse. The SGPC has had dedicated researchers, but it has not had leaders with the courage to do the right thing. SGPC printed a mere 500 copies of this report. The leadership of SGPC did not want it circulated at large. Admitting that there were errors in the various beads was not something the SGPC leadership wanted to publicize. The choices were to either bury this report and for the SGPC to bury its head in the sand as if nothing was the matter and do nothing, or to do the rectification but to do it quietly, secretly, and behind closed doors. Beyond the SGPC researchers, other Gurbani lovers and scholars did their own research on the issue of errors within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. 4 names come to mind: Joginder Singh Talwada, Joginder Singh Vedanti, Jagatar Singh Jachak, and Gurbachan Singh Pidra. You must be wondering at this point as to the kind of errors that have been discovered. First, we have errors in the structure of the Shabads. This is so because the original versions are Jodvi beads, where the entire verse is written in joint form with no separation between words. And the modern printed versions that we have now are Padashet, where the words are separated. So the process of separating the words can and has resulted in errors. Second, we have grammar errors. Gurbani grammar is denoted by the addition or removal of siharis and onkars. These vowels are not pronounced, so when a sihari or onkar goes missing in the printing process, it usually goes undetected in the proofreading process also. The third type of error is where entire words are left out from the verses. Then we have what we call non-error issues. These are pronunciation issues. Now, the writing style when the Puratan or old beads were written was to not write out the nasal vowels, the biddi and the tippi. This did not mean they were not pronounced. They were, but the nasal vowels were not written out. So now we have beads where biddis and tippis have been added, including many in the wrong places, to the effect of changing the meanings. Then, of course, we have what we call purposive errors, where the printers and publishers make changes and alterations on purpose to suit a particular agenda. One example relates to the opening verse. We know that the opening verse starts with Ek and ends with Gur Prasad. The Bani of Jap begins with the word Jap, followed by the first slok Aad Sach Jugaad Sach, all the way till Nanak Hosi Pi Sach. All three parts, the opening verse, the title of the Bani, Japa, and the first slok are distinct and hence separated by punctuation marks in the form of double dandis. We can see this especially clearly in the handwritten beads. There are those who believe, wrongly of course, that the opening verse begins at ek, includes the word jap, and includes the first slok. So these people, when they print and publish Gurbani, they remove the separating punctuation marks. Here is how this purposive error has been achieved by the Dera Chauk Mehta and Pindra Jatha under the name of Dum Dummy Taksal. As you can see, the double dandi before the word jap has been removed to suggest that the word jap is a continuation of the opening verse. Also note how the three separate parts, the opening verse, the word jap, and the first slok are all printed in one color, red in this case, to make the suggestion that all three are part and parcel of the same, that all three are joined together to make one entity, which is not the case. So that's an example of what we call purposive errors. The most serious is what we call the benchmark error. The benchmark that has been used by the SGPC is the Kartarpuri beard that has been in the control of the Tirmalis and the Sodhis. The primary assertion here is that if indeed the Kartarpuri beard is replete with copying related errors, discrepancies, adulteration and corruption, then the entire exercise of correcting errors and discrepancies since 1951 has been on the wrong foundation. Another point needs to be disclosed at this point. This is related to what Joginder Singh Talwada has written. Recall that Talwada is one of the leading experts on this matter. He writes that when he presented his research and work to Gurcharan Singh Toda, the then president of SGPC, he was told two things by Toda. One, that this issue is not to be brought out into the open. And two, that the way to do it was the way in which the leaders of Dera Chauk Mehta and Pindra Jatha, under the leadership of Baba Gurbachan Singh, have been doing it, printing quietly and behind the scenes. Here is what Gurbani expert Gyani Jagtar Singh Jachak said on this same matter.
तो जहदा टौड़ा जी ने क्या के भाई जिवें बाबा गुरबचन सिंह जी दे अनुयायी जेड़े ने ਉਹ ਚੁੱਪ ਚੁਪੀਤੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਕਰੀ ਜਾਓਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਵੀ ਐਸਾ ਰਿਹਾ.
We can draw the following two conclusions from the information provided by Talwada and Jachak. First, that Dera Chauk Mehta Pindra has been making corrections of errors in their Gurbani printing quietly and without announcements all along. And second, that the SGPC was aware of it and supported it. This is clear from Toda's view that the Dera Chauk Mehta model was the best. We further know that the SGPC has worked closely with Dera Chauk Mehta on this issue from the start. When the Sangli Beard was published and printed at Ramsar Press for the first time in 1962, SGPC had appointed Baba Kartar Singh of this Dera as the proofreader. So, for all intents and purposes, the final say for correcting errors within the SGPC beard was provided by the Dera Chauk Mehta. It is worth noting that the two leading institutions of the Sikh Panth, the SGPC and the Shiromani Akali Dal, had come under the influence of Deravad in the 1960s. In 1961, when the issue of Sangli Beard was on the front burner, Both of these institutions were headed by sons from the Deras. SGPC was helmed by Sant Chandan Singh and the Shiromani Akali Dal by Sant Fateh Singh. It comes as no surprise, therefore, that the head of the Dera Chauk Mehta ended up as the proofreader-in-chief of the Sangli Beard. There is one more thing worth noting. SGPC has been printing beads of the SGGS since 1962. That's 60 years. Now, if we take a look at the SGPC printed beads that we have in our gurdwaras and in our homes, we will realize that the year of printing is not contained on the bead. This can mean one of the following two things. One, that the bead that is printed in 2022, for instance, is the same one that was printed in 1962, which means no changes whatsoever were made, which means there was no second, third, fourth, fifth edition, etc. Only edition 1. The first edition has been printed and reprinted over and over the years. That's one possibility. Or two, that the SGPC did indeed make corrections of errors all along, and these errors were corrected in subsequent editions. These corrections were done quietly and behind the scenes using the Dera Chauk Mehta model. The model required that the SGPC not include the year of printing on the bead. Here is what Gyani Jagtar Singh has to say on this particular issue.
ਫਿਰ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਚਲਾਕੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਰਹੀ ਤੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਐਡੀਸ਼ਨ ਤੇ ਸਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਾਇਆ ਸ਼੍ਰੋਮਣੀ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਪ੍ਰਬੰਧਕ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਨੇ। ਜੇ ਸਨ ਕੁਝ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਨੇ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਕੋ ਹੀ ਸਨ ਮਿਲਦਾ ਹੈ 1991 ਵਿੱਚ ਸੰਗਲੀ ਬੀੜ ਦਾ ਤੇ 1994 ਦੀ ਐਡੀਸ਼ਨ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪਦਸ਼ੇਦ ਛਾਪੀ ਬੀੜ, ਇਹ ਦੋ ਸਨ ਪਾਏ ਨੇ ਐਡੀਸ਼ਨਾਂ ਤੇ, ਬਾਕੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਐਡੀਸ਼ਨ ਤੇ ਸਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਾਏ।
It is likely that the SGPC has been quietly making changes, corrections, and eliminating discrepancies since 1962. The Sikh world has been kept in the dark about it. SGPC may indeed have valid reasons for doing so. After all, the issue is a sensitive one, and the allegation that SGPC is changing Bani is so easy to throw at SGPC leadership and most difficult to rebut. This is perhaps why just about anyone who attempts to bring the issue of errors within the SGGS out into the open is subjected to the wrath of SGPC, labeled as a tankhaiya, excommunicated, and his books banned. Both of these actions, pyareo, the undertaking of corrections in secrecy and the punishment of those who want to discuss it openly are wrong, unjustified, un-Gurmat, un-Sikhi, and go against the grain of everything Gurbani stands for. It is an act of treachery to keep the Sikh world in the dark over such an important issue. Such actions must stop immediately, and the SGPC must come clean on all that it has done or not done. Let's move towards how to resolve this issue. But before I do that, some comments on the latest development are in order. As a result of Karminder Singh's decision to go ahead and publish an online corrected version, the Akal Takht summoned on May 3rd what it calls a Panthak meeting. At the close of this meeting, the Akal Takht Jahedar announced that Karminder Singh was a tankhaiya, meaning guilty of a conduct that can and does lead to excommunication from the Sikh Panth. The question is whether the Akal Takht and the so-called Panthic meeting have resolved this issue. The answer is clearly in the negative. In fact, what the Karminder episode, the Panthic meeting, and the Akal Takht decision has revealed are the following 5 things. First, that the Akal Takht is partisan. Karminder is declared tankhaiya, but Dera Chauk Mehta, which has done the same, have escaped mention. At this so-called Panthak meeting, the chief of Dera Chowk Mehta is seen speaking against Karminder Singh even. So this is a case of double standards. Now, if we accept that the Dera Chowk Mehta model is indeed the approved model for the SGPC as Toda made it clear to Talwada, we can understand this apparent double standards better. Second, the SGPC has lost its credibility. It says one thing and does another. In 1962, the SGPC banned handwritten beads on grounds that these were the ones that contained the most errors. Yet in 2007, the SGPC accepted for Prakash in the upper floor of Darbar Sahib a handwritten bead by a Malaysian named Jaswant Singh Khosa. More than 350 errors have since been discovered in this bead, and corrections made by pasting corrections written on small pieces of paper. This bead is now called the bead with pasted corrections, or chepiyan wali bead in Punjabi. A chepi is a piece of paper that is stuck with adhesive. Third, the notion of Panthak Jathebandis is in question. Who are they? What is their contribution to the Panth? How can those who are themselves guilty of the offense being deliberated be allowed to participate in the proceedings? Fourth, the Akal Takht and SGPC are incapable of providing leadership. Other than pronouncing a punitive judgment on Karminder Singh, nothing of a leadership caliber was shown on May 3rd. Finally, the Akal Takht and SGPC appear to have no solution to the problem. There was no mention of what the SGPC and Akal Takht intend to do about the issue of errors in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. At the very least, the announcement against Karminder Singh could have included a commitment to resolve the issue at the Panthak level. It was only a week later that the Akal Takht announced that a special committee will be set up to look into this issue. So, what do we do about this issue? Let's look first at what we should not do. First, there is no need for more committees or subcommittees. We have the 1951 report, the 1977 report, and we have 4 or more books on the matter. There is a saying in the SGPC arena, sab committee, sab kuch mitti, meaning when you want to bury a problem deep in mitti, then set up a subcommittee or a committee. In 1996, Akal Takht Jahedar Professor Manjeet Singh set up a committee to look into this issue. In 1988, Jahedar Ranjit Singh formed a committee to look into this issue. In 2021, Bibi Javgir Kaur, president of SGPC, set up a committee to look into this issue. These committees had never met even once, and there is no record whatsoever of their meetings ever. Second, there is no need for additional reports. Third, there is no need for Panthak meetings. Panthak meetings are sound and fury, jakaras and all included. It's a gathering of friends and family who are coming together to agree to whatever will be announced as a decision. The issue of errors and discrepancies in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji is not a matter for such a platform. Here are 6 things we should do and support. First, call for the SGPC to come clean on what they have done and not done. Have they printed revised editions of the Sangli beard? They need to come clean on what is the truth of the Kartarpuri beard that is with the Sodhi family. How many Kartarpuri beads do they really have? Why are they showing different beads to different peoples? Why is it so difficult to get access to the Kartarpuri bead? Second, the SGPC needs to explain why all these historic beads are not kept in a centralized location, such as the Sikh Reference Library. Why are they not digitized and presented to the Sikh world to look at freely? Why isn't the Kartarpuri bead photographed, digitized, and presented to the Sikh world? Why is access to it rarely granted? Why aren't the 4 beads, the copies said to have been made by Baba Deep Singh, photographed, digitized, and presented to the Sikh world? Third, the notion that errors and discrepancies are sensitive and emotionally charged should be discarded. This is 2022. This is the 21st century, Pyareo. The Sikh world is mature enough to handle the truth. It is our institutions that need to grow up. Fourth, the Akal Takht should stop the practice of excommunicating Sikh scholars, academics, and researchers. This is a photo of Sikh intellectual Dr. Pyar Singh, the head and professor in the Department of Punjabi Language, Literature and Culture in Guru Nanak Dev University, being made to clean shoes and polish floors at Gurdwara Ramsar in 1993, aged 80 years. His crime? He wrote Gatha Sri Adi Granth, the story of Adi Granth, a book that exposed the truth about the Kartarpuri beard. The May 3rd meeting decided to declare Karminder Singh a Tankhaiya and did so publicly. Not many of us are aware that the meeting also decided to censor a Gurbani scholar named Dr. Oankar Singh, who is working on a translation of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. A letter ordering him to stop work, signed by 5 Jathedars and dated 3rd of May, was sent to him. Any community that treats its scholars, academics, and researchers shabbily will end up being led by village idiots. Fifth, all Gurbani scholars must be viewed as wanting to contribute towards the solution. These Gurbani scholars, including Karminder Singh and his team at the Sikh Book Club, must be allowed to take part in the process. The SGPC and Akal Takht must facilitate, not frustrate, their hard work. And sixth, the truth of errors and discrepancies in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji must surface. The SGGS is the Sikh world's foremost, primary, and main source of respect and reverence. The truth will help maintain, sustain, and build this respect and reverence. Sweeping things under the carpet, burying our head in the sand, doing things secretly and behind the scenes will do the exact reverse. It will create more questions, raise suspicions, and create doubts about Gurbani. Such must never be allowed to happen. The final issue for this video is how does the Panth go about rectifying the errors and discrepancies, given that our benchmarks, the original Pothi Sahib and the original Dum Dummy Beard, are both lost. There are 2 basic ways. One is to benchmark against multiple beards. Doing so adds to the reliability and validity of the corrective work. This meticulous work has already been done by the 1977 committee. So what is required now is to implement this 1977 report. The other way is the one put forward by Gurbani scholars such as Principal Harpajan Singh and Principal Satnam Singh in their book Gurbani Sampadan Nirnay. Other scholars such as Jagtar Singh, Talwada, Vedanti, Professor Maninder Pal Singh of Sahibzada Jujhar Singh Missionary College, and Gyani Avtar Singh Jalandharwale have spoken about what we call Gurbani Likhan Shaili or Gurbani Vyakaran. Now, the basic thesis here is that if we study the structure, verse construction, composition style, the grammar, and poetic rendering of Gurbani, we will be able to pick out errors and discrepancies as they will all stand out. The premise is that compositions, verses, or even part verses that were added purposefully or by error will stand out as not being in compliance with the structure, verse construction, composition style, grammar, and poetic rendering of Gurbani. This is, of course, the work of experts, intellectuals, academics, and of Panthak organizations. There is, of course, nothing stopping us from using both methods, namely multiple historical beads and Gurbani Lekhan Shaili together simultaneously. We can argue that we have serious problems that will act as roadblocks. Problems such as a weak, absent, or a partisan leadership, deep divisions within our Panth, and exacerbated politics. We have problems relating to the fact that the SGPC and Akal Takht have been taken over by Sant Samaj, Dera, and Taksali groups, that the trust and confidence in Akal Takht and SGPC is at an all-time low, and that the missionary colleges have been sidelined, and with it, their Gurbani expertise. We have other problems, such as the fact that there are numerous adulterated manuscripts, and that the credibility of the Sikh reference library after 1984 has become suspect. The entire collection of the library was removed in the aftermath of the 1984 attack on Darbar Sahib. What has been returned requires an assurance that nothing has been tampered with. We can argue that because of all the above and much more, the likelihood of resolving the issue is low, and even if we do come up with a resolution, the likelihood of the Sikh world accepting the eventual solution is equally low. But what we need to remember is that the correct, accurate, error-free, and discrepancy-free printing of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji is at the heart of the principles of Gurmat and of the Sikhi way of life. There is no way that the future of Sikhi and that of the Sikh Panth can be safeguarded if the very pillar of it all, Gurbani, as given to us by our Gurus and Bhagats, all 35 of them, is allowed to become a questionable entity with regards to its accurate and error-free presentation within the printed versions of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Our institutions have failed us in this regard, and they have failed us badly. And it's partly because we, ordinary Sikhs, have allowed them to fail us. We need to stop that. One way to do that is to enlighten ourselves on this matter. This video is an attempt towards that goal. Thank you for watching.